Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fully Booked, the Hidden Gems author podcast, in which Craig Touch and myself, Roland Tume, chat some interesting figures and leading lights of this crazy industry we're in of writing and self-publishing. And today we are absolutely delighted to have with us Nzondi, who is a musician and Bram Stoker award-winning author, also known as Ace, Ace by name, Ace by nature. Ace, it is delightful to have you with us today. How are you doing today?
Roland, I'm so glad to be here. Thanks. This is a blast. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, we are looking forward to chatting to you. And of course, we wouldn't be here without the man himself, Craig Touch, the owner and founder of Hidden Gems. How are you doing today, Craig?
Doing really well. Thanks, Roland, and welcome, Nzondi. You know, I'm glad that you were able to take some time out to talk to us because, you know, I know you're super busy, you know, between writing. You've got an album on about 300, a single on about 300 radio stations. And then you're working on a 12-song album. And so your life sounds super busy, which is exactly what we want to talk about today, because, you know, not all authors are putting out albums as well as writing, but a lot of them are, you know, struggling with just being busy with whatever else they have going on in their lives. And sometimes finding the time to write is challenging. So you have dealt with this, and you've figured out a way to, you had mentioned a very methodical way to sort of work writing into your schedule. So we're going to talk to you all about that. But, you know, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself and how you got into writing and what, you know, the music and all those things that are keeping you super busy, and then we'll get into how you're finding the time to write.
Sure. Thanks. I'm a son of a nurse and an artist. My father, Chris Assman, DC Hall, was not only an artist, he was an activist and a songwriter and a painter. And he created one of the top selling black dolls in the nation at that time, a doll called Huggy Bean. He wrote a song that's very, very popular even to this day called So What. He wrote the lyrics of So What, sung by Miles Davis. And he painted tons of stuff. If you've ever seen the Kings of Africa, Budweiser, the King, a couple of those posters that are around, you know, back in the day and that are now in like libraries and universities. He did those, and he started the Black is Beautiful movement back in the late 50s and early 60s. So, you know, all of that kind of just oozed out of him and into me. And, you know, I started out as a school teacher. You know, I was in education for 13, 14 years in New York and then in LA. As an associate director of education. I have been a director of a few programs in education. And there was this void. I mean, I've always been a writer, from writing King Kong to Godzilla to Spider-Man to all kind of different comic books, you know, just drawing and writing stories and telling ghost stories to my little nieces since I was, I don't know, I can't even remember, you know, since the first time I saw Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein, I think maybe. And, you know, I've always wanted to write, but never really learned, you know, the actual specific details and, you know, the nuances of, you know, what it means to write a novel. You know, I thought I was a writer. And when I first started dabbling in philosophical, you know, epitaphs and, you know, and little stanzas and poems, you know, I thought I could write a book. But, you know, it was when I just had this big void and I quit my job at the Civil Learning Center and started learning how to write. And it took me about 6 to 8 years. And I, you know, finally kind of got it down and sold my first novel. And the rest is history. I love writing, you know, and so I'm, you know, basically an author by nature. And as far as the music goes, I always wanted to do music kind of like what my dad did. But it was kind of like it was like a girlfriend that you broke up with. Yeah. And you see her years later and you say, oh, hey, how you doing? Let's want to have some coffee sometime. And you go out with her again. And you remember why you broke up. And that has always been my relationship with music.
That's hysterical.
So music's always been like a love-hate. But, you know, really through my book that I'm writing now, which is my 5th book, my 4th novel that I'm writing now, some of the characters play in a band. And, you know, I got inspired to kind of write some songs. And next thing you knew, I called up and got the drummer from Puddle of Mud, Dave Moreno. He played the drums on it. On my track, and Fredro Starr, who's in an iconic group called Onyx, and he's an actor, and, you know, he got on it and did his little thing, and I came out with a rock song called Teenage Rockstar based on the character in my book, and now it's on close to 300 radio stations. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Wow. I mean,
You're a busy guy, which is, yeah.
It's nice to have all these connections. Like if I decided to write a song, I wouldn't have anyone to call. Maybe I could call you now, but other than that, I've got nobody who's going to be playing the drums and the, yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, I get it. I get you've got all this going on, and, finding the time to write is challenging. So how have you started to figure out how to work that into your schedule?
When I used to teach, I taught 8th graders. One of the things that I used to try to instill in them was the philosophy of you really have to be crazy to be good at anything, to master anything, to be excellent at anything, to be seen by your peers as, as worth, talking to, as good. And I always used to give them that idea of, think of, Michelangelo painting the Sistine Chapel, how crazy it is. The normal person would not spend hours and hours and hours. If you've ever been to any church or any place in Paris or France or Italy, anywhere, and you looked up and you seen a ceiling that's painted and beautiful, and the massive work that it took to go behind it, you actually see that, it takes a crazy guy to do that. Or someone who's crazy about their passion and their work. And so I started developing this, this method to how, to really get the writing down, and so I have quite a few different methods that I approach to that are consistent. Part of it is being consistent to getting the stuff down and getting the writing down and finishing a book, which is probably one of the hardest things I've ever done in my entire life, was finish one novel, much less 2 or 3 to 4, going on 5. So yeah.
So you needed to figure out a way to be great without being crazy. Is that what you mean?
It's like, it's putting the time in, all of the different nuances or all of the different, things that it takes to really craft a really good story, which includes reading. I know a lot of authors that don't read a lot, and I'm like, how do you, so that takes a lot of time, just to read a book, a novel. You see a ton of Stephen King novels, like each one takes like 10 years to read, basically, like 600-page books. I'm being funny, but reading, and then it was just setting goals, little tiny goals, from, hey, I'm gonna write 15 minutes a day, every day, no matter what, to getting myself away from distractions. Which, there's a lot of things. So, I'll wait for you to ask me the questions, but, I can kind of detail every single thing that I do as far as that. So,
I mean, you right off the bat, there's something that writing 15 minutes a day. I mean, I know, and Craig knows, and any self-published author knows, the key to success is to keep writing, but it's so easy to have a day where you don't write anything, and that turns to 2 days, and that turns to a week, and then suddenly you're like, what can you do? Whereas if you write every day, you can't help but end up creating something that has value.
Yeah. A quick story. When I first started writing, I said, one of the things that I had to do was get myself around writers. So that was the first thing I did. I said, I got to get myself around people who are engaged in this process of writing, who actually put out books, And so I joined the Writers Society. So that was one of the first things I did. I joined the Writers Society, did a lot of volunteer work, and that led me to meet a lot of different writers. In the society that I was in and volunteering for, we went to a lot of cons, a lot of conventions. And next thing you know, I became the vice president. It took me a couple of years. I became the vice president of that. So now we would have these speaking events, and we would have different great writers come to speak to our panels and to speak to our members. And one year, we had Ray Bradbury. Oh my God, listen.
The Ray Bradbury.
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
Wow.
And we used to meet in a library that we now call the Ray Bradbury Library, in Venice, in California. And the thing that he told me that stuck with me was, you got to go to the library every day. He said, go every day. And he said, try to write I don't really write a lot of short stories, but this is what he told me. He said, try to write a story every day. Now imagine if you wrote a story every day. Yes, that's 360 plus stories. And yeah, maybe a lot of them might not be good, but I guarantee you some of them will be really, really good. And that process that he put in my mind was, you just got to keep writing. You got to keep writing, got to keep writing, got to keep writing, and put yourself in an environment that nurtures the writing. So joining the society, putting myself around other writers that had a passion for writing, and then putting myself in a quiet space where I could dedicate, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. It turned into like 6 hours, dedicate that on a daily basis. Or as, because I work in the entertainment business as a stand-in. So that could sometimes be 10, 12 hours a day on set, so I'd have to find the time to make it work while I'm writing and reaching those goals. And I change the goals up sometimes too. Maybe it was 100 words a day, 200 words a day, oh, I missed a day. All right, so I got to do I got to do 400 words today. Whatever it was, I would create a different goal and try to reach that goal. So that's part of it.
Wow. You've been doing this a while, because Ray Bradbury died in 2012. So that was, you've been at this for a good amount of time. Yeah. You look pretty young to me. I wouldn't have thought you were that old.
I turned 57.
Oh my God. You don't look a day over, 40 to me. But
thank you. I'll take that.
Okay, so let's go through some of the steps then. How does this get started? What do you do first?
Okay, so the first thing I do is and each it's funny. It's kind of like, if you have any of you had children? Do you have children?
Yeah, I have a couple.
Yeah, I have 3.
Okay, so if you have more than one, you totally get this. For me, I had 2 boys. I raised them since they were 2 and 4 years old, and which means they're not my biological, but I raised them. Now they're 27 and 25. So since 2 and 4 is very young. And I realized each son is different. Like you try to, work with this, I'll treat it, it's that different. They have different sensitivities, different likes, different, they respond to things differently. So for me, each book was different. Each approach was different, So, but for the most part, I would sit down and I would just kind of write the story. I'll let the characters talk to me, and I just kind of write the story. So that was the first thing, just kind of get it down. Just start writing, just get it down. Try not to worry about too many mistakes, or try to clean it up at editing. Don't do too much self-editing. I would just get the writing down. Actually, let me go back. Before I did any of that, I had to get rid of the distractions. So I started trying to write at home, which is probably why I'm, divorced from my 3rd wife, because leave home. I'd have to leave home. I'd have to get out of there. So I'd have to get out of there. And before I started going to the library, after I met Ray Bradbury, I'd go to Starbucks. Listen, I'd bring a bottle of pain pills, ibuprofen, and I turned my phone off. And there were times when I would literally, I'm not even exaggerating, go to Starbucks, the one on Soup in Los Angeles and Woodland Hills, at 5 in the morning when it opened. Like, I'm there waiting on them to open it, and I go and find this little cubby hole. Like, if you know the Soup one, you go right in the corner where I couldn't see people as much. Have my headphones on. During that time, it was a lot of Jimi Hendrix. Headphones on, Jimi Hendrix. Tons of coffee. Pain pills for the 3rd hour when I was there, and I would be there from 5 a.m. to 11 p.m. at night writing. So the first thing I had to get rid of the distractions. So the phone's ringing. I don't see it ringing. Ex-wife is mad at me. I'm not answering the phone. All that kind of thing. I understand if you're a mother or a single father, you can't do that. The phone always has to be on. If you have young kids. But these are the things that I did. I had to get rid of the distractions. I'm a big gamer. I used to love playing games. I can't write at home. I'm like, I'm gonna I deserve a break now. So my break is to play a little NFL Madden football or a little Resident Evil. You tell yourself things like that. So I had to get away from home. Oh, I'm hungry. Oh, I want to get a beer. Oh, is any Corona left? You just find excuses to get up. And once I got the beer, I'm like, oh, let me see what's on ESPN. Let's see what's going on. And I had to get rid of the distractions. So I have rules. When you go to Starbucks, you can't answer the phone. Or if you do, you look at the phone periodically. No games, no TV, no Netflix, only writing. So those are rules that I had when I was at Starbucks, and you don't have those kind of rules when you're home. You're like, so I had to get away from home and get myself in an environment where I would be which was conducive to my writing. So that was the first thing. I tried parks. I love writing around nature. It's, you know, oh, I love that. But then there were like little bugs crawling on my keyboard and stuff like that. So I had to get away from that. And so yeah, Starbucks worked for me in the library. So that was the first thing. And then, you know, I've never had writer's block. Thank goodness. And maybe because of this strategy. Whenever I don't have the story there to write, per se, the plot to write, it's not moving forward, I work on details. I work on characterization. I work on, hey, I use this building, you know, for my setting. Was this building the right building in New England at the time in 1980? Is this, so I look up the architecture. So I look up details. You know, I'm flying my character's flying a helicopter. So I look up, how in the heck do you fly a helicopter? I can't be too general. So I would look up different little details, science, to see if the science was right. And then by the time I spend researching, you know, 2 or 3 hours have passed. That's a productive day. So sometimes if I wasn't writing, I would do details, you know, idioms. What were they saying at this time period in South Carolina, you know, in the 80s? You know, what is it? Might be different. Do they call it pop or fizzy? Do they call it soda? You know, different things like that. And that helped me get some really crucial stuff down to make my writing tighter and more polished. So I did those things as well. I can keep talking. I don't know if you have more.
Well, okay. I mean, so a lot of those things, like, you know, you being able to go to Starbucks, this is earlier in your career, right? But you know, that's it doesn't sound like that's something. It's not sort of like the idea of fitting it into a busy schedule. Like in that sense, you're like saying, to hell with my schedule. I'm writing is my schedule. And but like you said, like not everyone can break off from their lives and do that.
Right.
You know, they've got to find those little bits of time to fit it in, right?
So yeah.
Which is probably...
So the number one thing with this, I believe, is sacrifice, right? So one of the first things that worked for me before I started going to Starbucks, before I started, you know, going to the library, was finding the time to do it. You know, at the time when I first started writing, I was still in education. So it was very demanding. I was a director, you know, I worked a lot of hours. So I got up at 4 o'clock in the morning when the world was asleep. The world was asleep, no distractions. I'm at home. I put in a little bit of time before I got ready to go to work. I was tired as hell during the day, but, you know, that was how that is probably the best advice for someone who can't, you know, work around their schedule as much. I'd have to work outside of that schedule, which was, for me, was early in the morning, because late at night doesn't work. You're tired, you know, the day is gone already. Kids are up, you know, what have you, TV's on, all kind of stuff is going on. So it was early in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning. So that also can help.
I haven't been doing that so much recently, but I remember I used to do that, and I found it amazing because you were downstairs, you had your coffee, you were fresh, and there were no distractions. My kids were still asleep, my wife was still asleep, the house was quiet, and I remember when I was able to fit that into my life, it was incredibly productive period.
Yeah. So Craig,
I remember Roland doing that for a while. He would be up at 4 or 5 a.m. and doing that. That's not, I'm not a great sleeper at night, so I've got to take the time. But I often think, like, last night was one of those nights where I was just laying there for hours, not able to sleep, thinking to myself, I'm just wasting time right now. I could just be so much more productive. I'm not sleeping anyways. I should have just got up and did some writing.
Well, I think part of it is you've got to find, what's right for you. Ernest Hemingway wrote early in the morning, whereas Hunter S. Thompson wrote all through the night. And so I think it depends on what works for you. But I mean, Ace, I know that I felt that when I was able to get up that early in the morning, then it was like, wow, 2-3 hours you could spend and get a day's work done.
Yep. And I think also is you really have to just make a decision, a choice. Okay, this is what I want to do. So this has to be a job, so I got to commit to it. I got to figure out a way to get this done somehow, some way. Like even when I was on set for 10, 12 hours a day, so I worked as a stand-in. For those people who don't know what a stand-in is, a rehearsal actor. Basically, we're there. Like, say for example, I did, I stood in for Rock on the Oscars. Okay, the Rock on the Oscars, the last Oscars. Now during the Oscars, you don't really interact with the actors as much, because they only come for their rehearsal once or twice, and you don't really react. Your TV shows, you can react. You tell them, hey, we did this, we did that, and you build relationships. But shows like that, you don't really interact. But what I did is when we had to go up, like for example, The Rock had to read from a teleprompter. The lighting is getting all of, they're just getting the lighting down that they need for that. The camera's working on the moves when he walks from behind the curtain to here, whatever the different scenes might be, the camera's working on the moves, the lighting's working, the sound is working, the teleprompter people are working. So they're doing different things, while you're rehearsing for that particular actor. Well, that may have lasted 10 minutes, 20 minutes, sometimes an hour. And then you go sit down. When I'm sitting down, I'm writing, baby. I'm like, this is my job. I got to get this stuff down. I'm writing, it might be 5 minutes and I got to get back up. I had to make the decision that, instead of my other friends who are like over there talking and going getting a banana, a bagel, I can't do that. I got to get this down, because no one's going to do it but me. So I had to make that decision and that sacrifice. So sometimes it comes in really, really tiny chunks, but you just have to be consistent and do a lot of tiny chunks to get it done. So
I will say one thing that might help with that, which I find myself doing, is like if I'm waiting for my kids or I'm waiting the line at the checkout or something like that. Yeah, if you're thinking about the sentence that you're going to write and you kind of have that in your head, and then when you've got the 5 minutes, you just write that sentence. But it's kind of like, just because you are unable to physically write because you're doing something else, if your brain is not active, you can think about what you're going to write when you manage to get there. And it's almost like downloading it. Obviously you can't do paragraphs of it, but if you've got a chance to like write a single paragraph and you think that paragraph off in your head and then you can hammer it out and then go and do something else, means you can be productive even when you're not able to be productive.
Correct. Craig, have you ever tried this? I only usually do this when I'm starting a book for the most part. On the way to work, which usually is somewhere between 15 minutes to an hour because I work in different sets, I turn the radio off and I do just what Roland was saying. I go in my head and I'd go over the scene in my head over and over. Sometimes I'd say, you know what, the character, she would never say that, and I'm just going over and over in my head. So by the time I get to work, I get to a place where I can write, it's in my mind, it's solid. I know exactly what I want to do or how I want to fix it. To me, that's writing too,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, half the time that's what's keeping me awake is all the stuff spinning around in my head. Can't turn that. There's no off switch that I've found. Yeah. Or in the shower, you've got no distractions in there. You're doing your hair and you're just thinking, and you're thinking about a lot of my greatest ideas come to me when I'm there because I've got no distractions at all. It's rote. I don't have to think about what I'm doing. So your mind wanders and you just, you think about all these other things. So when you're taking those times, when you're standing in or when you're in the grocery store, what are you writing on? Are you bringing a laptop with you or are you doing it on your phone or?
Whatever I can write on. I've been in Hooters writing on a napkin before. It's really whatever I can write on. I don't pull out a book, but I even write in my books, books used to be really sacred to me. Like, oh, don't touch my book. Oh, the page folded. Now it becomes research books, highlight different areas that I thought was really cool. So I may even write, if I don't have anything to write on, I might write in the back of the book, this idea, that idea. I've brought my laptop, and a lot of times it is on my laptop, but I have a little small iPad, so I might write on that. It's whatever I can use to get it down. A lot of times it's on my phone, my little notepad on my phone. I use that a lot nowadays, the little yellow notepad. I use that a lot, so whatever I can write on, I write.
Yeah. And I really liked what you mentioned before about, the idea of when you're blocked. A lot of writers, they decide, oh, I'm writing and now I don't know where to go. And they go and do other things completely, or they try to push through it and it just wastes a lot of time. I like the idea of pivoting and doing other writing related tasks that are still going to move you forward, but not necessarily, you know, you've just moved to a different task instead of pounding your head against the wall trying to get some blood from a stone there when it's just not happening. You just move on to something where you don't need to be creative. You're going to do your research. You're going to do your, you know, just you know, your plotting, your characterization, all that stuff. I like that that idea too.
Yeah, because, you know, that's also, you know, I call it a pass. You know, a lot of times once you finish the book, then you got to go back and do a pass. I remember one time I did a pass, and it was during a period of time where I used the word "so" a lot. Oh my God, I had the word "so" 5 trillion times, you know, in the book. So I had to go and get rid of so this and that. So I'm like, wow, I had no idea I was that repetitive. And that alone took hours to go through and get rid of. I mean, you do a search for "so," but then you got to clean it up. You have to come up with something, a different than that. And, you know, characterization passes where I'm like, that's not consistent with how that character speaks. You know, she won't even speak here. You know, she would just ignore him, whatever, you know. So there's so many different things you can do when you have that writer's block that enables you to move forward in the process. So I agree.
And it's a time saver too. I mean, like you were saying earlier, like, you know, you got to the write your story, don't self-edit. But if you're blocked, you can use that time to go and do a bit of editing because you're not writing anyways, right? And then that's not wasted time. That's time you're saving from later on. Like you're going to get back later on.
Yeah.
So then what's the next step after that? We had write the story, don't self-edit. What comes next?
Do I have some stuff written down here? Let me look on my little pad here. Oh yeah, you know, and like I said, I really believe that you really have. This might sound simplistic, but I know a lot of people who don't do this. You have to set aside time for reading. When I read, I write. You know, a good friend of mine used to say, I've taken what his words and repurposed them into. I read to inhale, and I write to exhale. And the process of breathing.
That. That's interesting.
Thank you. The process of breathing creates a story. And so, you know, it really is that. When I read, you know, I'm like, wow, this character's doing that. Oh, you know, a lot of Lee Child books, you know. I don't know if you can't see him way up here. My Lee Child books, you know, that character, you know, he just does such really cool, you know, kick butt stuff. And Lee Child is really, really he really is descriptive in how he explains how things are done, you know. And just reading that gives me that aspect. Like a lot of the writers that I love, each one of them have something about them that helps hone, you know, skills that I want to have in my writing. You know, Stephen King is really good with characterization. Oh my God, that's why his books are so long. You really know the characters. You know, like I said, Lee Child is really good with descriptive writing. And so, you know, Laura K. Hamilton with her Anita Blake series is really good with personality, you know, and having that female that just has spunk. And of course, not romance, but not eroticism, but just sexiness. She's really good with that. And so each one of those little details, Octavia Butler, each one of those little details, from reading a ton of it, allows me to be able to, you know, it comes out in my writing, you know, but through my own style and through my own, you know, way of thinking. So, you know, another one of those processes is reading. I read to inhale, I write to exhale.
Now, it sounds like you read quite broadly as well. I remember Stephen King's always like, you need to read as much as you write, but it's like to go you mentioned 2 very disparate authors right then. And so what is your approach to books? What do you like to read if you have such a broad reading?
I'll break it down to you like this. So for my novel, Awari Mosaic, that won the Bram Stoker, I wanted to write. I always wanted to, actually, before when I used to want to be an actor, I wanted to be I wanted to be the Black Quincy. You know, there was a show in the 70s called Quincy Medical Examiner. He was a forensic investigator, Jack Klugman. You know, I loved him in Odd Couple.
I remember that show.
Yeah, man. So And he was just so passionate. He would yell, he would argue with, he was just so passionate. So I wanted to be that character. Since I knew I wasn't going to be that character, I said, maybe I'll write a character like that. So I basically took a young girl around 17, 18, put her in the metaverse, actually what I call the neuroverse, because a lot of things happen in their mind. So like the games they play are in their mind, it's not the metaverse, but the neuroverse. And I had to become a forensic investigator. So for that whole process, I needed to know mystery. I needed to have a badass chick, a kick butt chick. I needed to have, of course, horror, and I wanted a good detective. So I studied Quincy. I actually watched the programs and wrote down line by line different things he did, the TV program. I studied Sherlock Holmes. I studied a lot of Sherlock Holmes, the books and the TV series, and I wrote down a lot of different things, plot lines and plot points. I read a lot of Lee Child. I wanted to see what this character was doing, So that aspect helped me with the detective part, the kick butt part, So that's why it's kind of broad like that, because I read books that were specific to the type of details that I wanted to put and mold my character and my story around. And of course, Anita Blake, just the strong female character that has a lot of problems, is always fighting herself and her own emotions to do things that she really doesn't want to do, which is really, I guess, the basis of characterization anyway. But that's why it's so widespread and why, I read those a variety of different genres or subgenres because it really helped me, mold my writing.
Now, I find that really interesting. I write romance novels, and there's a formula for writing romance novels. And it sounds counterintuitive, but once I learned what the formula was, it made it easier for me to write, because I knew, like, oh, I'm writing this story. I have these characters. I need this to happen. I need this to happen. And it was almost like being able to draw a roadmap, and that made writing through and getting to the end much easier. And it sounds like you've got the same thing. Quincy, I remember that show had it was a regular structure, just like Columbo. The Columbo, all the episodes always had a structure to it. But a good book has a similar structure, and an author you like has a structure they kind of repeat. Lee Child is a brilliant example. It's like there are 25 Lee Child books, and each one is different, but at the same time, each one is familiar. And you read them and you kind of enjoy what goes through. So it's almost like you sound like your broad reading was giving you the tools, just like writing is a craft, not an art. You're like a carpenter, and you're getting the tools to be able to craft what it is you're building. But I like that approach because, once you learn these tools, it helps you structure things, because you're like, okay, I have to do this bit, I have to do that bit, and it maps out what you need to do. It's almost like a blueprint for your book, and then you just need to fill in the blanks.
Absolutely. Yes, sir. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've read a lot of I've read all the Lee Child, Jack Reacher books as well, and I agree. He's got his approach to writing. I found really motivating for my own writing. Is I mean, every writer is like that. Stephen King is a very different writer, right? But you have to find what resonates for you, and that's probably going to be a variety of different authors. But there's something that even when you're reading it, you're not mimicking them, but you're drawing in all of their knowledge and all of their styles and all their stuff. And that's sort of like, it absolutely makes me a better writer when I read more. If I stop reading, it's much harder for me to write. I can't put the words together as eloquently or as quickly, because I'm just, writing is like a muscle, right? And, if you're not reading it and you're not writing, you're losing that. The muscle gets flabby and weak, and it's much harder.
Yeah, I look at it like, I'm a big, huge, spectacular fan. And when I say that, I don't mean that I'm like I know every detail and I have every book about it, but I'm a huge fan of Bruce Lee. And, the fact that Jeet Kune Do is based on going through these different styles, right? And then not taking any one of these styles, but letting these styles create who you are, and you create your own style. It's training. Just like you said, it's a muscle. So the reading for me was the training that I needed, the consistent training that I needed to develop my own style. And so here I am, I'm going through all these different styles, and you have to read a lot in order to absorb what that style is. To understand, you know, to innately, subconsciously what that style is, you have to read a ton of that particular, you know, author's work to really get a grasp of that. But then it becomes who you are, you know, and then you just create your own style based on all of the different influences that you had. So you're right, it's not mimicking, it's growing through their styles. It's growth.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So now that you're okay, so now that you have, you know, your music career is going on, you know, you're working on an album, you probably don't have the ability to, you know, take those long writing time periods that you had before, right? So you adjusted your style to sort of, you know, fit it more into what's going on in your life right now, when, you know, like before it's like, okay, I make that sacrifice, but now you've got two passions to sacrifice against each other. It's like maybe writing switches because you're writing songs, and so that becomes part of that, you know, that period. But if you're still trying to write novels while you're also trying to put together an album, I feel like there's probably going to be some, you know, headbutting of sacrifices and priorities there, right?
Raise your hand if you had kids, please. Raise your hand.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So I guess the best way to explain this type of chaos is you love both of your children, or all three of your children, or all of your children just as passionately. But as they're growing up, they have their own things that they're doing. The spelling bee over here, the play over here, soccer over here. And you have to attend. If you don't attend them, man, they give it to you, right? So you have to attend all of these different events, you know, the choir, the band, and you it's not even about finding time. You get there, you make it happen, you get there. There are different responsibilities, and you know, it's different times, some are longer than others. And for me, that's kind of how this schedule has been for me. No matter how much I schedule it, it doesn't work that way, because, you know, for example, I woke up this morning and I'm like, okay, I got to finish this mix on this song, you know, so I can get it to the record company. I got to finish the mix. You know, I've been mixing it for 2 or 3 days, and each day I go in and be like, oh, that's done. I got to tweak this. This is not right. And I'm like, I got to finish the mix, and I can't move on until it's done. Like, I just can't stop until it's done. If it's done in half an hour, great, moving on. If it's done in an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, I have no idea. It's just, I don't stop until it's done. Now, when it's done, I can move on. So I'll set aside, okay, I'll work on the mix from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. and I'll be done. And then at 11 a.m., I'll write to 4. And if I'm still mixing to 4, then 4 p.m., I'm not able to write. So I'm like, okay, I'll write tomorrow. So it has been that juggling of chaos, you know, but I still am able to kind of get the things done. And then I make a promise to myself, as soon as you're done with this project, you know, once this song is done, now you got to write. No matter what, you can't go back to the song. Even if it's egging at you, a new song, you got to finish, you know, you got to write, you got to spend time writing. So I have to set those rules that, okay, I didn't get my writing down Monday, but I got to write on Wednesday and Friday, period, you know. And so that's kind of how I've been juggling it. And then I'm a hypocrite, because then it doesn't always happen that way. But I just still try to set those rules to kind of get it done. So it's kind of like juggling, you know, children's schedules in a way. It's like, you know, you got to get it done, and somehow you get it done.
Yeah, I mean, it probably doesn't work the same for everyone. You know, everybody works differently. Everybody has different ways that, you know, that things work for them. I find, like you, like setting a rule, not like I'll probably do this today. Like, it's a rule is, for me, much easier to follow than sort of just being like, well, here's my plan, I'll probably do that. You know, like for instance, I've been doing intermittent fasting, right? For a long time, you know, we tried different diets, whatever. And I can't stick to them, because I like to eat what I like to eat. And, you know, and I find it really hard to sort of like be like, oh, I can't eat that. You're in different situations where you can't eat certain things. But for me, you know, not eating during a certain time is much easier. And to me, that's like a rule. And like, so 8 o'clock will come and I can't eat anymore. And at the beginning, it was a little harder, but it was like, you know, I'd be like, oh, I want a snack. Usually I'd snack now, but I'd be like, no, the rule is I can't eat after 8,
Yeah.
right? And now it's like, it's so easy. It's so much easier, right? Because it's a rule, and people will be like, oh, like, you know, they'll have something and they'll offer it to me. I'm be like, nah, I can't. And they're like, I can never do that. I'm like, how can you do that? It's a rule. I don't know. It's my rule. You know,
that's on something really, really important that I always forget, because sometimes, you know, I'm speaking to Roland and Craig. I'm speaking to you too, and you know, we're writers. We've been writing for a while, but sometimes it's that person that just started, and they're like, "Yeah, but how? How do I get there?" And I forget that that's one of the most important things. And if you understand that there's a science to the how, then you can get to the how. And the science is this: it takes, I forget the exact number, but I'm pretty close. It takes somewhere between 50 to 60 times of doing something in a row, and it becomes a habit. So it's about developing habits that work. So again, if you develop a habit of writing every day for 5 minutes, which is nothing, that's nothing, 5 minutes. After you do that for about a month and a half, something eggs at you when you don't write. You're like, oh my God, I didn't write today. Like, it's something in you that just eggs at you. You have to build the habit of doing something consistently. So, you know, I've done intermittent fasting as well. It's like no eating after 7 p.m. And at first it's kind of hard. Like, oh, I just want a little snack. I'm up, you know, I want a little snack. It's 10 p.m. I'm watching the game. You know, so I learned that I had to develop other ways of getting past that. But once I did it for a while, it was nothing. It was nothing to do,
right.
you know. So I remember that I had to build the habit. So the science of it is, once you do something consistently for 50 or 60 times, which sounds like a lot, but really it's only about a month or 2 months. You start very small, in small increments, do it consistently. You develop a habit that you can't break. And that's what it is. It's becoming, turning a goal into a lifestyle. So once you turn it into a lifestyle, I think that's when you're able to make these rules. You have to settle, you know, you have to make it a lifestyle. Then you can make these rules and you can set these goals and reach these goals, because now it's part of your lifestyle. Like eating. No one forgets to eat, you know, because we're so used to it. It's part of our lifestyle. So,
right. And if you're super busy and you don't have a lot of time in your life, you know, think about the time. Everybody's got that time they're wasting, you know, they're watching their shows, or they're, you know, doing whatever it is they're doing. And even if it's okay, every day I can fit 30 minutes of writing in, and that's my rule. I have to fit 30 minutes a day in, and that sometimes is going to mean I have to give up watching, you know, my favorite TV show, or sometimes it's I shouldn't take that nap or whatever. But you got to get that 30 days in, or 30 minutes in, and then after a while, you know, that'll be your habit, and then you'll get it. And then if you want, you extend it. Now I'll do 45. Now I'll do 60, and that's how you're going to find that time and squeeze it into your busy schedule.
Yeah, I agree. It's sacrifice too. You know, first, when I wrote my first book, I made a rule: no TV. I didn't watch TV for about a year or something like that. I can't even believe I did that. Like, I watch so much TV now. I can't believe I went like a whole year not watching TV. I watched football games on Sundays. That was it. So yeah, it's a huge sacrifice.
Priorities.
It's a huge sacrifice, but you know, that's part of the process. It's sacrifice.
Yeah.
Nothing is won without sacrifice.
Yeah.
Now, unfortunately, it looks like we're coming to the top of the hour, so we're going to have to wrap things up, Ace. But what a fascinating discussion this would be. Before we wrap things up, and before, Ace, you tell everyone where they can find out more about you. Craig, do you have any final questions?
No, I mean, listen, we covered a lot of bases here. You know, Nzondi, Ace, he has a lot of, you know, really solid tips. He's been doing this for a lot longer than I thought. And, you know, he's got it down. He's a busy guy, and he's got a few books now, and he's won an award. He's got an album going. You know, I think that we can all sort of learn that if nothing, like we said, nothing in life comes without sacrifice. Nothing worthwhile comes without sacrifice. So you pretty much have to figure out what is worth it to you, and what, you know, whether or not you know, watching another show is more important than eventually getting your book done, you know, or whatever it is that you have in your life that you might sometimes have to pull away from a little bit to fit in something that maybe is more important. So thanks for coming on and reminding us all of that.
Now, Nzondi, where can everyone find your books, find out more about you, find your music? Let us know, and obviously we'll pop the link down below as well.
Real easy. You can go right to my website, and the website is antoniohall.com, and from there you can find it. You can go to links, the music links, interviews, etc. My books. A as in Apple, A again as in Apple. So A Antonio Hall, all one word. Hall as in Arsenio Hall or Hall of Mirrors. A Antonio Hall, not Ace Antonio Hall, but A Antonio Hall .com, aantoniohall.com. And you can go there. If you want to contact me, you can hit the contact page and write a message, and you can reach out to me. And and look out for my new single. I have a new single that's coming from my 12-song album coming up. That's going to be entitled Nzondi, you know, my name. Is that eponymously? Yeah. And so the new single's called Light It Up. So it'll be coming out somewhere between the end of September, October. And I look forward to letting everyone check that out. It's I think it's a cool song. It's a little different from stuff I've done before. It's alternative rock. Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate it. This was fun.
Well, we really appreciate you taking the time to. And if you've been listening to this, whether listening to us on your podcast, watching us on YouTube, make sure to go down to the comment section below. Leave Ace a comment. Let him know how much you appreciated the wisdom that he had to share. And while you're down there, hit that like button. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. And we'll be back next week with another episode of Fully Booked. So until then, cheerio.